Welcome, Brian Barrett, to the show, and we're going to do a part 2 about Alice in Wonderland and the occult significance of Alice in Wonderland.
Okay, cool. Well, you asked me to do this last time. I think the thing with Alice in Wonderland is that we have to understand what was going on at the time, yeah, but we also have to really understand, who was Lewis Carroll. And the best way to understand that is to try and get a snapshot of his belief system. Now, his belief system was Rosicrucian. Now, also at the same time, he was a follower of Theosophy, which of course is Madame Blavatsky. And he is, I spoke to old magicians many years ago. He was very much associated with the Golden Dawn. And it's highly likely he was a Mason. The reason why it's highly likely he was a Mason is because all his diaries, apart from 2, were taken, which is generally a sign of being a Mason. So on one level, we have the very sort of straight-laced mathematician teaching in Oxford, but on another level, we have somebody who is really tuned in to what we understand as esoteric thought, which at the time was very popular. But I think for us to understand what Alice in Wonderland is about, we have to understand the Sophia. The Sophia was written about in what is now called the Nag Hammadi texts, but there is also a apart from the Gnostic Sophia, there is also a pagan Sophia. Essentially, it's a realm of knowledge, but let's try and explain what the Sophia is first before we go on our journey. Well, really, it's the Sophia is the personification and the sort of like acceptance of the ideal mind God, yeah, in a realm which is called the Pleroma, or the treasury of light, or the eternal realm. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Sophia is said to have accidentally created the physical world. In doing so, she became trapped and unable to return to the heavens. Now, this is very much the same, if you like, with Alice, who falls into the rabbit hole. She's trapped in time and space. And in that sense alone, we understand that she is a fallen soul, and that her spirit is descending out of matter. In the book, there is references to a kind of light spreading out from her, and everything changes color, and the world is opening out. Yeah, and she's awakening, and it's kind of weird. If we go back to like John Steinbeck, who was also really influenced by this, he actually says a kind of light spread out from her, and everything changed color, and the world opened out. And a day good to awaken to, and there were no limits to anything, and the people of the world were good and handsome, and I was not afraid anymore. And our sister Sophia is also innocence, and this is another part of what is very much Alice. Alice is incredibly innocent, sort of like, and this is where the connection with the Alice Sophia is all bound together. Essentially, by accessing the Sophia, we have, if you like, the foreknowledge of what is the sovereignty of heaven. Okay, because in the book, she's always searching for the garden. And of course, if we go back to like the biblical formation, it starts in the Garden of Eden. So whatever state Alice is in, she's trying to find the garden. Yeah. Okay. Now, interestingly, she's given a hint of a golden key, but she sees the golden key through glass. Yeah. So something is stopping her from getting to the key. She goes bigger, she goes smaller, but each time she forgets the key. So the glass is probably symbolic of the ego, yeah? And when she's really big, she's not bothered with the key. When she's really small, she wants the key. And this is where, if you like, the Cheshire Cat comes in, because the Cheshire Cat is is seen as the illusionary nature of the self, yeah, and also the impermanence of all things. This is not he read Blavatsky, so essentially he would be very much in tune with this sort of like Eastern philosophy of the self and Buddhism. Now, interestingly, when Alice falls into the darkness, she's surrounded by covers, books, and lamps and mirrors and everything that float past her as she falls. But if we understand from the Kabbalah, she is moving from Malakut through to Yesod. So essentially, all the trappings of this world are disappearing. So essentially, it's if you like, it's the decimation of what she understands. Yeah. So it's only when she's got rid of the ego and all the trappings of the ego that she can move on, because it's only when we are light that we can travel, yeah, and we've got rid of all the material earthly things, yeah, and also we've got rid of our sense of ego, because that holds us back. However, we also have to remain curious, hence why Alice is always curious, and she's always mindful of how things really are. I'm not making this up about Alice dying, because the original story was Alice in the underworld. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah.
No, I didn't.
So essentially, she does, she is dead, or she's in a process of dying, or she's astral traveling, but I think she actually dies. Now, at the time, sort of, there was lots of, like I said, there was Blavatsky, there was Crowley, there was Golden Dawn, and they were all looking at this. But however, there was also people from the science background, like, say, for example, the great physicist and astronomer Sir James Jean wrote that the universe begins to look more like thought than a great machine. Yeah. And if we take this sort of further, we look at and if we look at Alice as an initiate, then she really falls into what sort of Carl Jung's child archetype is, trying to remember the self. Yeah, as the esoteric Alice, psychic, is channeling many things, maybe many lifetimes or many spirits. Also the other side of it, at the same time, we have Nietzsche's book, and we have this eternal reoccurrence in Nietzsche's Thus Sprak Zarathustra. So, I mean, the one thing that it's obvious is that Lewis Carroll is absolutely fascinated with the mind and its working and altered states of perception, because in his later book, Through the Looking Glass, he says, well, the knight says on his behalf, what does it matter where my body happens to be? My mind goes on working all the time. So essentially, this is like really important to get this mindset that we're dealing with, if you like, a complete transformation, and Alice may well be dead. And this makes sense now when she meets the caterpillar, because the first thing the caterpillar says was, "Who are you?" And it is more than a rumor that the caterpillar is in fact Crowley. Now, when she meets the caterpillar, she regards this as not an encouraging opening for a conversation. And to quote, Alice replied shyly, "I hardly know, sir, just at the present. At least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I've changed several times since then." So obviously we are talking about some kind of journey. If we're tying into the Hindu Buddhist thing, we're probably talking about some kind of reincarnation. But part of this reincarnation is to stop reincarnating and to find, if you like, the journey's end, the paradise, if you like, the Godhead, which is represented as the garden throughout the story. But then we have to understand who is Lewis Carroll. I mean, Lewis Carroll was intelligent and multi-talented. He was a mathematician, he was an illustrator, he was a teacher, he was a photographer. He invented something called the nightograph, which was a device to help one read in the dark. Publicly, he presented the persona of an Anglican deacon. However, as I've mentioned, privately, he followed Blavatsky, the Golden Dawn, Freemasonry, and Rosicrucianism, which is essentially all explained in his writing. But moreover, Lewis Carroll also worked at the Oxford Library as a librarian for some time. So he really had access to a lot of information which the normal citizen of the time would not have had access to. The actual story came about because he enjoyed reading to Alice Liddell and her sister, which eventually became the classic novel Alice in the Wonderland, later known as Alice in Wonderland. So went from Alice in the Underworld to Alice in Wonderland, which was written under his pen name, Lewis Carroll. His real name was Charles Luttridge Dodson. But essentially his background has always been religion. Which his father and grandfather were connected to the church. I mean, but there's also another misnomer. Alice in the Underworld, the Alice in the novel, physically is Alice Liddell. However, it's suggested that there was a woman called Emma Hardringe Bitton, whose real name was Emma Floyd. She was a psychic and a member of the Orphic Circle, which was a kind of a trendy spiritualist club of this era. And a lot of people who know about this believe that Alice is actually more like the woman Emma Floyd than she is actually Alison Liddell. So, it's really interesting, it's really interesting. But when we, but when we start the journey, that, it is the black and white swirly tunnel that leads to a wonderland. There's lots of arguments. Is it the subconscious? Is it a stargate? Or is it another dimension? Or is it death? However, being a magician, I would rather go for it's, she's died and she's living through many, many lifetimes. But there are many references also to time and tributes to time, which of course the god of time is Kronos, the Greek deity, who is the personification of time. But it's even more complicated than that, because the name Alice, on, if you like, face value, is just a girl's name, but essentially it's Greek for meaning truth. I don't know if you knew that. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, it means truth. So if we go back to the beginning of the story again, we after the falling and descending into either heaven or hell, she's definitely in some kind of fourth dimension. But one of the, if you like, one of the guides in this realm is the hair, which were known to the Celts as guides of the soul. And they also appear throughout Christianity, which is really strange. But all this ties into, like I said, esotericism, Blavatsky, and also the modern spiritualist movement at the time throughout Europe and the sort of USA. During this time as well, you had sort of Hindu mystics coming over to America, and it's really interesting. Quite a lot of people say that there was some kind of sordid relationship between Alice Liddell and and Lewis Carroll. However, it has been investigated on a like a forensic level, and there is no evidence of it. However, there is plenty of evidence that he actually had an affair with her mother, which is quite unusual. But going back to the white rabbit, the white rabbit, it's always been a symbol of purity and enlightenment. That, if you like, in the case of Alice, it's very easy to note that the white rabbit is a shamanic guide who journeys her between the worlds. It awakens her to a new life. But the other thing as well is the rabbit hole is also, if you like, the access to the underworld, and it's also, the rabbit is also representative of using one's initiative and one's inner self, if you like. So the rabbit leads the seeker into a masses of reality to reveal truths in the universe and one's true self. For example, in the Matrix, Neo is asked to follow the rabbit, i.e. is asked to find his true self. Yeah, okay. But moreover, the rabbit is also about time and being out of time and racing. In the book, he races through 7 dimensions. And this ties into the book of Enoch, which also mentions the 7 heavens. So, like when Carroll is introducing the story, he's not introducing a linear time. It's our soul passing through different worlds and being recycled. However, while we're doing this, we are doing it in a state of amnesia. Hence, Alice asks, "Who am I?" Yeah. Now, Carroll is pulling on what has already been known. The hair were known, like I said, to the Celts, and they're sort of like, and they appear in Christian Church as the Celtic triskelion, which is, it represents life, death, and resurrection and reincarnation, depending how you interpret it. And it's also related to the Fibonacci sequence. The triskelion of floating rabbits is from an ancient German riddle. 3 hairs sharing 3 ears, yet every one of them has 2. You can think about that for as long as you want. And as I said before, in St. Mary's Church in Beverley, Carol's hair is there, and it has the love heart on a bag with the love heart. So one must understand that this book is not just on one level. It represents our soul passing through different worlds to be recycled, as well as, if you like, Alice's kind of bemusement at it all. The cat is really interesting because cats have only recently been in Europe. They've not been here that long. However, but the cat was in Mesopotamia over 100,000 years ago, and they were domesticated approximately 12,000 BC, about the same time as dogs and goats, etc., etc. Archaeological excavations have proved this. There was a eastern wildcat which was then sort of, if you like, domesticated. But I believe that the cat in the story is the goddess Bastet, and she's often depicted as a cat or a woman with a cat's head.
Bastet, is that the same as Sekhmet?
No. Bastet, she's got a cat's head. She was one of the most popular of the Egyptian pantheon. She was also the keeper of the hearth and the home, and also the protector of women's secrets and guardians against evil spirits, disease. Yeah, but she's also the cat of a symbol of divine wisdom, which ties into the Sophia, which we mentioned in the beginning. However, we've also got tied in to the cat. We've also got, if you like, a lot of Buddhism. For example, one of the quotes is, "You are on the other side. Reason, intellect, books, and knowledge are not important by any means. Are not the short, and these are not the shortcut described by the Cheshire Cat." So, over intellectualizing will not find you the enlightenment. It didn't find Alice the enlightenment. It was only when she started to act instinctively or with spirit that she sort of like started to progress through the underworld. But it's very interesting that the last thing to leave is the grin of the cat. And interestingly, she says to the cat, "Have I gone mad?" And he says, "I'm afraid so. You're entirely bonkers. But I will tell you a secret. The best people are." Now, the reason for that is, of course, is that when one goes back to that time and we're looking at theosophy and we're looking at the Golden Dawn and we're looking at sort of, if you like, Masonism, these people were finding information which is completely contrary to the information that they were not being told by the church. And when they tried to talk to people about it, they just said, "You're completely balmy. You've got no idea what you're talking about." So this is why this quote is in there. Is, if you believe in this dimension, if you believe in what I'm talking about, then most people will think you're absolutely crazy. For example, if you said to somebody that if you are a magician, then you can open a sigil and talk to a being from a different level of consciousness in the same way that I'm talking to you, they would just look at you and think you were deluded. Yeah? Okay? But, this is the problem. This is the problem with the ego. Because you can't do something doesn't mean to say something else cannot be done by somebody else. Yeah? Okay? And this is where the Queen comes in. The Queen of Hearts is our ego self, if you like. It's Alice is ego self. It's the identification with the self on who she supposes she is. Yeah? Okay? So the Queen of Hearts really is Alice in many ways. And Queen of Hearts is literally, if you look at the story, she's in the middle of Alice's conflict. Yeah? And unlike the other characters of the story, she's not concerned with nonsense and perversions of logic. She's she rules absolutely, and she sort of executes as well. So it's kind of like it's a complete parallel, say, to the caterpillar who lounges on the mushroom and smokes opium and takes magic mushrooms to obtain out-of-body experiences. The other interesting thing about this is that the Queen is solid in identity, where the caterpillar is not, because once again it's tying into this continual morphing. And like at that time there was still quite a lot of beliefs that humans morphed. If you didn't believe in Jesus, you would turn into a werewolf or a Wendigo. A Wendigo is similar to a jinn. It's a human characteristics which possesses everything negative about human. But the worst thing about it is it's insatiable. It always has a greed and hunger, and it cannibalizes other humans. Very similar to the Gahul in the jinn. So it's when the caterpillar is saying, "Who are you?" Does he mean that she's Alice? Is she the Queen, or is she some kind of now corrupted entity? It's answered in the question as when she says, I rather shyly, "I hardly know, sir. Just at present, at least, I knew who I was when I got up this morning, but I must have changed several times since then." Then, of course, she meets the Mad Hatter, or if you like, the March Hare. Now, the Mad Hatter is in this state because during the Victorian times, they used to use mercury to clean the hats. And the fumes from the mercury used to rot the brain cells, hence they went crazy. The March Hare, on the other hand, went crazy when it saw the moon. Yeah, so you have two conflicting characters, but really they're the same. They're both absolutely insane. And the Hatter was supposedly guilty of murdering time while singing to the Queen of Hearts. Yeah, but I think this is the, if you like, the false ego, if you wish. You know, it's sort of. But the one thing to understand is that the Mad Hatter's tea party, with the hare and the dormouse, they are all mirrors of the mind and various states of being. So essentially, once again, Alice is working through the senses of being. But there's other things which are actually happening within the story which people don't understand, which essentially the story is divided into 12, and it's divided into 12 for a really good reason, because essentially the zodiac signs are at play. For example, Aries is the Jabberwock, Taurus is the King of Hearts, Gemini is the Duchess, Cancer is the Mad Hatter, Leo is the White Rabbit, Virgo is Bill, Libra is Alice, Scorpio is the Queens of Hearts, Sagittarius is the Cheshire Cat, the Capricorn is the Caterpillar, Aquarius is Dina, Alice's cat, Pisces is the White Queen.
Can I ask, how did you know that?
Because I research.
It's odd because my radio show was called Queen of Hearts, and I think that that's always meant a lot to me, and I'm a Scorpio, so that's just strange.
Well, there you go. I mean, the Queen of Hearts, in a sense, the Queen of Hearts is literally the heart of Alice's conflict. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And she's the only character which isn't crazy. Yeah. That's why we know she is the Queen of Heart. Yeah. Okay. Which is sort of, which is like really interesting. But like, you know, but the whole story, if you like, is to emphasize that we are trapped in the delusion of the self. Yeah. I.e., what we are is a misbelief and the core of our being. Yeah. But what is really us is separate and independent and unchanging. Yeah. So realistically, Alice's quest to find herself is our quest to find ourselves. You know, that is the great puzzle, and that is why I believe he used Alice for truth. Yeah. And you know, in later times, you know, we have the work of Siri Nisaragada, I am that. Yeah. And essentially he's saying the same thing. He's saying that, like, outside the construct of what you believe is to be yourself, there really is the true self. And that, if you like, I believe is in fact the journey of Alice. The journey of Alice is through the higher mind. She finds the true self, and then she is reincarnated again. Yeah. You know, she comes back to this world, and you know, sort of like, this is, you know, this is the story. The story is the Sophia. The story is the higher mind. The story is Buddhism. The story is, it doesn't matter how many times you change, unless you contact with the soul, you will never really, if you like, progress. You know, and it also sort of like deals with many esoteric truths. For example, it's the golden key. The golden key, gold is very important because it doesn't rot and it doesn't corrupt. You know, for example, they find ancient Egyptian jewelry and it looks the same as the day it was made. You know, so, you know, and this, you know, this is reflective of the soul, but it also gives you the warning that, you know, when you take the stuff and you go bigger, you tend to forget about the soul, and when you go smaller, you really want the soul. It's really, you know, it's a very, very complicated story. Why it's a child's story, I've got no idea, because it has nothing to do with anything a child experiences, in my humble opinion. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I didn't like it as a kid, actually. Why did they make it a kid's story?
I think because it's nonsense, really. You know, if you read it from sort of like, it's like a very, it's about a girl who's meets really ridiculous characters. Yeah. However, you know, like if it would have been Alice in the underworld, then you'd understand that she is actually dead and that she's missing, you know, she's probably meeting many incarnations of herself, you know, you know, which completely changes the story,
Hmm.
so to speak.
Do you believe in that Alice in Wonderland mind control?
I don't know what to believe, seriously. I don't know. I'm sure that, you know, it's like behind everything, there's always a smattering of truth, isn't there? Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you know, to what extent? I mean, the only thing I've ever read about the sort of Manchurian candidates and stuff like this is that they were all dropped at some stage because the results were very hard to reproduce. Yeah.
Right.
You know, they could get some people and get the same results, and when they tried it with somebody else, they didn't get the same results. But
Mhm.
however, you know, I mean, you know, is it disinformation? Can they actually do it? Can they order people to do, you know, to behave in diabolical ways? I would say yes, and you know, and that's really based on, if you like, the occult significance of the Hassins. I believe I've said this before, where they faked their deaths and made out that heaven was an absolutely amazing place where they would go when they would die. And of course, these men wouldn't flinch about dying in battle because they'd gone to a place where they took loads of drugs, got drunk, slept with beautiful women, and they were really willing to go back there. Yeah. So, if
Hmm.
you like, that was your first mind control,
Hmm.
suggesting to these guys that there was a heaven, which they constructed so that so that the soldiers or the assassins would be fearless.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And what
So
about, sorry.
yeah. So yeah, I think yeah, there is, you know, that is a very overt form of mind control. So I'm sure they've got better at it.
I suppose if you're going to, I mean, I know in Monarch Mind Control, they supposedly get the child and give them trauma, and then it smashes the self, and then they get one part or the core part, and they induct it into. I mean, if they did induct it to the Alice in Wonderland type system, I suppose then there would be triggers for, going into the altered state, like now go small, now go big, and then you're sort of. I mean, there's a lot of key sort
Well, I
of.
mean, once again, maybe I don't know. I mean, the thing
Well,
is,
like
is
wider.
is is like the, you know, you have to look at history to find out how these things are done. And
Mm,
to me, it makes perfect sense if somebody believes in a hereafter because they've experienced it, then they will not have any fear. Yeah. You know,
mm,
if you're drugged and you end up in this wonderful place, which is amazing, and then you were told that you died, then you have no fear of death whatsoever. Yeah. Um, and it's a lot to do to make somebody not frightened of death. And I think that if you kind of break the personality too much, then you lose the personality. However, if you give a person a belief in something which may or may not be exist, then they are more likely to operate in a certain way. Yeah.
mm.
Whereas if you sort of fracture somebody, one would presume if somebody is fractured, if something is broken, then it would be very hard to understand what you're actually doing, because you know, you're dealing with, like, if you like, multiple personalities. And I'm sure this can be done. I'm sure they can create multiple personalities. But the point is how stable are the personalities? Whereas if you construct a belief in somebody, they're more likely to be controllable because, ultimately the belief, if you like, sees them towards the end of their journey. Very much in the case of Alice, it was only the pure belief in herself that gets her through the underworld, so to speak, because nothing else helped her in there. But even in the underworld, she was conflicting herself because a part of her was logical and wanting to do things and precise, which is the Queen of Hearts. And the other one was a child who was just swept away with the curiosity of everything.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's like I said, it's one of my favorite books. I often read it time and time again to try and understand more deeply what it's about. And like I said, after reading it many, many times, the only thing I can really come up with is a lot of the philosophy is similar to a very ancient book called Esoteric Buddhism, very similar to Blavatsky. There's quite a lot of Masonic influence in there. There's also lots of warnings. For example, in the later books, you've got the walrus and the carpenter. The walrus represents the Buddha, and the carpenter represents Jesus. And of course, both the walrus and the carpenter eat the oysters, which represent the people. So, there does seem that Carol is trying to say that you really don't need this ideology and you don't need to sort of follow other people's ideas. What you need to find is the self, so to speak. But like I said, this sounds very hippie and drippy, but for the time, you only got to look round. Crowley, Blavatsky, Steiner, people like this are all writing amazing stuff. And of course, if he was in those circles, then, which he was, he would be heavily influenced by the idea that there is, that there is, if you like, an alternative answer to the Christianity, which essentially was being promoted. But at that time, what else was being promoted was that God was dead. Hence the Nietzsche in the Gay Science, where he's talking about God being dead. Well, he isn't really meaning about the God. He's meaning about the fact that, like, the way the industrialism and the science and everything was being presented. It was presented in a way that there was no significance of God. And so so essentially, that is where Lewis Carroll was. And obviously Lewis Carroll was a very devout religious man. However, he understood that the doctrine of religion was not the answer that he was looking for. I'm absolutely certain of that.
Yeah, which of course makes sense because they don't want you to have any power, do they? Those that have set up those organised religions.
Well, I think once again we're back to the caterpillar. We're back to Mahuka, because Mahuka asks the awful question, "Who are you?" Yeah, and I don't see how the Western man is a follower of desert gods, if that makes any sense. Yeah, because like the desert is pretty seasonless. It does get hot and cold, but it's pretty seasonless. Where in Europe we have seasons. Yeah, we have seas, we have lakes, we have like lots of elemental aspects that they don't really have in the desert. So essentially our primordial belief system dealt with elementals, yeah, where the desert gods are like thunder gods or jinn or creatures which are alien to if you like the European understanding of what our world is. And realistically, during this time, this is what people were asking, especially Blavatsky, and in a similar vein, very much Crowley as well. You know, sort of like towards the end of this sort of, if you like, Renaissance, we then get things like Gardner developing witchcraft and Wicca, you know, which came out of this, you know, if you like, the alternative world. But when you look at this, you understand what the Cheshire Cat is saying. You know, you have to be mad if you believe in this stuff.
Interesting. So, I mean, you were saying about us here in Europe having the seasons, and what did these pagans, how did they worship the sea? Just pranced about in the woods and stuff like that?
Not really. I mean, essentially, you know, sort of like you would connect with the season, right? Okay, but it depended. It depended sort of realistically on what discipline you followed. Yeah. Okay. You know, sort of like you know, like say for example, if we look at the Vikings, yeah, although the Vikings, they actually brought the religion to us, yeah.
Uh-huh.
You know, once again, it was an invading religion. It wasn't really part of our religion. I mean, I presume one of the earliest religions, which is kind of which is sort of like nearer to us, is probably the Celtic religion. Yeah, you know, the Celtic magic. And you know, we really have to understand what God is for what, so to speak. Yeah.
Right.
You know, sort of like it's very difficult because once again, so much information is kind of missing. But like, say for example, if we're looking at like Norse mythology, you know, you've got like for like this month, May would be Harper, yeah, okay, and then the next May, you know, the next month was Scarapla, December was Year. You know, they had different gods for each time, and essentially, you know, they would use, if you like, runes to connect with them, and you know, they would also have tattoos which are associated with, you know, with their gods. You know, it wasn't just essential. You know, I mean, the naked women and guys dancing around in the forest is very much the Gardenian tradition, because Gardner, first and foremost, he was a naturist, and I believe that he may have tied his naturist beliefs into his Wiccan beliefs. However, if you study Guardian witchcraft, very much of the first few initiation rites come from Thelema, because Gardner was, you know, was an associate of Crowley. And in fact, Crowley asked him to take over Thelema, but he didn't. So, you know, like, you know, once again, I believe that at one stage, Gardner did have some access to witchcraft. Allegedly, he followed one of the Arabic witchcraft, which doesn't surprise me, seeing his early work. But the point is once again, you know, sort of like finding our general elemental magic. I think the only way we can do this is probably through Celtic religion. Because it's very confusing, magic, throughout Europe, because many of the states were like Indo-European, so they were very heavily influenced by India. And it's, you know, it's only through like Christianity that these sort of Indo influences died off. And so, you know, it's to find the real religion is really, really difficult. But the one thing that is absolutely plain is that I don't believe the thunder gods and the desert gods have anything to do with European legacy. You know, I mean, the Hindu Indo-European gods seem to be much more in tune with what it is to be European, if you like, than the gods of the desert. Yeah.
Why don't we just all worship the creator god?
Well, I mean, sort of like first prove there's a creator god.
Pardon?
I said first prove there's a creator god. You know,
sure, there must be a god that, you know, made us all, no?
Well, I mean, once again, it's very difficult. You know, I mean, this, you know, I believe there is, if you like, a creative universal force stroke entity. Yeah. Okay. Whether or not you can connect with it, I think is dubious. Yeah. Okay. You certainly can't connect with it on this in your physical form. I think that's obvious. Yeah. However, the Chinese tried to sort of like explain it by talking about, you know, in their Taoism, where, you know, they talk about an eternal force that runs through everything. I mean, essentially that's what Star Wars was based on. You know, it was based on Taoism. And I think because of the difficulty of tuning in to the, if you like, the universal force, that's why we tune into gods which are nearer to us. I mean, what, you know, like the popular gods are like the solar gods or the moon gods, yeah, or the 7 visible planets, where we can, you know, where we understand, you know, we connect them with you know, with gods, you know. You know, for example, you know, we've got Venus, yeah, but literally, if we look at Venus, you know, Venus is also associated with, you know, Satanism and Luciferianism and stuff like this. You know, it's very, very complicated, and it's, you know, it's made complicated because we don't really have any sort of like evidence, you know, sort of like, because the Christians destroyed most of the evidence that we needed to, you know, to understand, you know, but like in the old days, all the planets, the sun, the moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, they were all associated, you know, with a god. Yeah. Okay. You know, sort of, and that's what people worship. They worship what they could understand. They probably had a sense of a universal creator god, if you wish, but they either prayed to the moon, or they prayed to the sun, or they prayed to Jupiter. You know, and you know, once again, realistically, you know, this is, you know, this makes sense because it's much easier to get a mental idea when you can see something. Like when you read the ancient Greek texts, they always talk about Artemis as being a solid thing. Well, she is. She's the moon. Yeah. So you know that makes perfect sense. If you truly believe that Artemis is the moon, then you will talk to the moon like it's a real human being. Yeah. Once again, we're back into Alice. You know, sort of like, you know, she's doing the same thing. She's struggling to find this enlightenment, this way to release the soul.